Good morning to brethren on the team. Thank God for another day He's blessed us with. It's good to come again to share the word and to answer our last question from the last segment. Sorry. And today we're going to look at the blood of the new covenant. We're going to answer that question this morning, and we're going to look at some scriptures which I'm going to put on the chat so that you could do your own investigation as you score the word for truth and for the proof of what we are discussing. All right, so in First Corinthians chapter 11, from verse 23 to 26, we have the Apostle Paul answering the question about the community church, right? And he emphasized when he reached the drinking of the wine that represents the Lord's blood, he described it as the blood of the new covenant. Okay? Blood of the new covenant. And where he got this from, it was in Matthew chapter 26, from verse 26 to 29, where Jesus was having the Passover supper with his disciples. You know, people call it the Last Supper. And this was taking place on the Thursday evening before the Lord and the disciples went into Gethsemane, where he, was going to be arrested and taken to trial. And the Lord told the disciples, this is this is a covenant in blood. It's a new covenant, Paul called it. And how did they arrive at that? Now, in order for there to be a new covenant, it had to have an old covenant. There had to be an old covenant. And from what we did before, I mentioned to you in earlier lessons that God made a covenant with his chosen people, the children of Israel, when he took them out from Egypt, the land of sin, and he brought them, to Mount Sinai to give them a new life, a new way of life, a holy way to live, as God's chosen people. He made a covenant with them. And this covenant included the law and the commandments. They included all the observances, feast days, you know, different rituals, different sacrifices. It was a whole new way to live, and it was what was supposed to lead them to holiness. That whatever they did, it was to be done as unto the Lord, and it was a lot of sacrifices of animals. There were a lot of observances, a lot of do's and don'ts. It was weighty, but that was what the covenant was about between God and his chosen people. And we talked about through the centuries that went on that the people didn't live up to those rituals. They didn't live up to the covenant. They broke the Sabbaths, and it went right on into the New Testament, where people still didn't take God seriously, and they were doing anything on the Sabbath, and they were taking the Sabbath for granted. He wasn't keeping it holy. He was not remembering God. He had all these various commandments, and it was just about, going through the motion, but in their hearts, there was no love for God and there was no love for fellow man. People were just. So when Jesus came, he wanted to bring reason and purpose to what it meant to worship God in spirit and in truth. He wanted to show people a better way. He wanted to show them the right way. He wanted to show them his way, which was a new way. That's why he mentioned, he's bringing some new stuff. And one of the new things he was bringing was a new covenant. This covenant wouldn't have just been about the Jewish people. This new covenant was going to incorporate the entire world. This wouldn't have been just about the Israelites and the Jews. This would have been for everyone of all ethnicities, all races, all color, all languages, all tongue, from all over the world. And he has proven that when he spoke with Nicodemus in John 3:16, he said, "For God so loved the world," not just the Israelites or the Jewish people, but he so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever, which includes you and me, all Jews and all Gentiles, and once we believe in him, we will not perish but have everlasting life. But the fact remains that when Jesus came, he came to the Jews first because they were God's promised people. He had us to do this thing right. He had us to do it in order. So in Matthew chapter 15, from verses 21 to 28, he mentioned that he came only to the lordship of the house of Israel. There was this Canaanite woman who was a Gentile, and she had a demon possessed daughter, and she needed help immediately. She needed deliverance for her daughter. So it didn't matter to her whether she was Jew or Gentile. She needed desperate help. So she went to Jesus and he mentioned those words to her. When she asked for help, he said, "I can't help you because I came only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." And she begged and she said, "Lord, I really need your help." I'm just paraphrasing. But she said, "I really need your help." And he told her, "But I can't take the children's bread and pass it to dogs." And she said to him, you know, whilst that is true, sometimes the dogs eat from the crumbs that fall off the table. And it sounds like it was to be an insult, but it was the trying of her faith. And that was the thing. And she stood her ground, and the Lord said, this is great faith. You didn't walk away, you held on, and this is what I'm looking for. And he answered the prayers, and her daughter was healed from being demon possessed. Now, in John chapter 10, Jesus, speaking to the Pharisees again, explained to them that he is the good shepherd. Remember, he said he come to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. So he is this good shepherd. And he's explaining to them that nobody will come to the Father except through him. He's the doorway. He's the gateway. He is the way, the truth, and the life. Nobody comes to the Father except through him. He said the sheep is going to hear his voice and they're going to answer and they're going to follow him. He was talking about the people in Israel, those Jews who would believe on his message, who would believe he came from the Father, who would believe that he is the Messiah, and they would obey and follow him as sheep follow a good shepherd, right? And there's something he said in verse 16 of John chapter 10. He says, "There are other sheep that I have who are not of this fold or not of this sheep pen. They too I have to bring in, so there will be one pen, one sheep, there will be one big place where everybody could come together. And he was this other sheep he was referring to the Gentiles, people of the world who aren't Jews. He said we have to bring them in. So we have one fold where we'll incorporate the Jews and the Gentiles. And you see, for the church to really have its identification, has to be made up people from all over the world, all, as I said before, all ethnicities, all races, all language, everything. That is how the church is identified, not as a Jewish thing, but an international, where the word of God reaches everybody, because this blood of the new covenant was shed for everybody. That's why it was shed. When you research Hebrews chapter 9, the point is going to be proven, where he talks about moving from the old covenant into the new covenant. So you go do your reading on Hebrews chapter 9. And when the church comes together, right, as Jesus told the disciples that as he sent them out to be witnesses just before his ascension to heaven, he said you're going to start off in Jerusalem, then Judea, then Samaria, and then you're going to move to the uttermost parts of the earth. You're going to reach people. And it was proven on the day of Pentecost that when the 120 in the upper room were filled with the Spirit and they spoke in other languages, they actually spoke known languages to all the people who were gathering on the day of Pentecost. So everybody who came from around the known world at that time could have understood the gospel in their language. So it was showing, the expansion of the covenant to include world. But one thing must be mentioned. As the gospel was spreading from Jerusalem to Judea to Samaria, and as it was going through the world, there still was that essence where the leaders of the church in Jerusalem, they were trying to keep the church as Jewish as possible. So they were still trying to force on the believers who were coming in, the Gentile believers who were coming, they were still trying to force on them the Jewish practices and observances and rituals. They still wanted the Gentiles to be circumcised, and they wanted them to observe the different festivals, whether it was, Pentecost, whether it was the Feast of Trumpets, Feast of Tabernacles. This, they wanted to observe new moons and Sabbaths, and certain things, like certain meats and certain drinks abstain from, and all these different things. And they were trying to put that old covenant burden on the new believers in the church. Tell them they have to follow that in order to be part of the church. And that is not what Christ had in mind for us. That's not what he had in mind. You have to look at um, Acts, the book of Acts, chapter 10, where Peter got his vision of the descending sheet with all the animals. And look at Acts chapter 11, the following chapter, to see how Peter dealt with the leaders in the church concerning that issue of forcing the burden of the old covenant onto the new Gentile believers, right? What the emphasis was on, and this is all through Paul's writings, the emphasis is not on observing laws and observing commands where people are trying to get justification. The emphasis was on, in order to have justification and salvation from God, all we need to do is have faith in Jesus Christ, who has shed his blood for the redemption, of the entire world, for people, of the entire redemption of their sins, where people could come to Him, not by trying to observe the law because it will be by works. We're trying to please God by works. And, we as the scripture said, all of our righteousness sometimes is going to be like filthy rags. We can't do it by works. We are not justified by observing the law. We are not justified by trying to do works. We are justified only by having faith in Jesus Christ, who has shed His precious blood for the redemption of many along the road. So that is what the whole covenant thing was about. Now, I'm going to give you the scriptures. I'm going to put it on the chat, and you can do your own research. And the next time that we chat, it's going to be sometime in the week, probably midweek. I'm going to deal with that question that asks about how the early church responded to the resurrection day, first day of the week. How did the early church respond to it? And as we go along, we're gonna see why it is many believers worship on the first day of the week. Of course, there is no rule or law that says that days of worship will change from Saturday to Sunday, but we will see why the believers worship on a Sunday. Those from the early church. I'm going to show you one or two scriptures, and I'm going to show you one or two points. I know people are saying a lot of things that it was the Roman Catholic Church who changed the Sabbath day worship into the Sunday worship because they are claiming there's this man, they're claiming a verse from Daniel where they say a man is going to come and he's going to change times and season. And they actually quote a pope, right? They could quote for you some pope that says they're going to change the day from Saturday to Sunday. Now, whether that is true or not, that is not the reason why we worship on a Sunday. I'm going to deal with that later in the week. But for right now, I want to just tell you when I put up the scriptures on the chat after this conversation that you go do your research. Do your own research. In the meantime, stay blessed, stay safe, stay in the Word.